In 1954, Admiral Richard E. Byrd sat down for what should have been a routine interview on a CBS program called Longines Chronoscope. He was 66 years old, a decorated naval officer, and one of the most famous explorers in American history. The interview aired once, just once, and then the tape disappeared. For 70 years, researchers, historians, and conspiracy theorists have been asking the same question. What did Admiral Byrd say on that broadcast that was so dangerous it had to be erased from history? And why, in an era when television networks archived everything, did this particular episode vanish without a trace? If you're finding this compelling, hit subscribe. I cover suppressed history, forbidden archaeology, and the stories powerful institutions don't want you digging into every week. Now let's get into what Admiral Byrd actually said, what happened in the months leading up to that interview, and why the official story about Antarctica might be the biggest geographic lie ever told. Admiral Richard Evelyn Byrd wasn't some fringe figure. He was American royalty. Born in 1888 to one of Virginia's oldest families, Byrd entered the Naval Academy at Annapolis in 1908. By the 1920s, he'd become a pioneer of aviation, leading expeditions to both the North and South Poles. In 1926, he claimed to be the first person to fly over the North Pole. Whether that claim was true is still debated today, but it didn't matter. The public loved him. President Coolidge gave him the Medal of Honor. He became a Rear Admiral. His face was on magazine covers, but it was Antarctica that defined Byrd's legacy. Between 1928 and 1956, he led 5 major expeditions to the frozen continent. He established Little America, a base camp on the Ross Ice Shelf. He flew over the South Pole in 1929. He spent 5 months alone in a buried hut during the Antarctic winter of 1934, nearly dying from carbon monoxide poisoning. When he came back, he wrote a best-selling book about it called Alone. The man was a national hero. When Admiral Byrd spoke about Antarctica, people listened, which is why what happened in 1946 is so strange. That year, Byrd led the largest Antarctic expedition ever mounted. It was called Operation High Jump. The official story is that it was a scientific and military training mission. 13 ships, 33 aircraft, over 4,700 men. For context, the entire population of Antarctica today is around 1,000 people in the summer. Operation High Jump brought nearly 5 times that number to the ice in 1946 for an 8-month mission that was supposed to last 6 months but ended after just 8 weeks. The official objectives, according to declassified Navy documents, were to establish a research base, test equipment in frigid conditions and train personnel. Standard Cold War prep work. But researchers who've dug into Operation High Jump point out a few things that don't add up. First, why send an aircraft carrier, a submarine, and a fleet of destroyers to conduct scientific research on ice? Second, why were there so many casualties? Official records list 6 deaths, but multiple sources claim the number was higher. Third, why did the expedition end so abruptly? Byrd himself later told a reporter that the mission was cut short due to unexpected difficulties. He didn't elaborate. Then there's the Chilean press report. On March 5, 1947, just weeks after Byrd returned, a Chilean newspaper called El Mercurio published an interview with him. According to the article, Byrd warned that the United States needed to prepare defenses against enemy fighters that could fly from pole to pole at incredible speeds. He reportedly said that in the event of a new war, America could be attacked by fighters that could fly over one or both poles. The article was picked up by other South American papers, but in the United States, mainstream outlets ignored it completely. No follow-up, no clarification, nothing. Here's where it gets even stranger. In February 1947, right around the time of that Chilean interview, Byrd was scheduled to give a press conference in Washington. Multiple sources say the event was cancelled at the last minute. Byrd then disappeared from public view for several months. When he re-emerged, he never spoke about Operation High Jump in detail again. Not in interviews, not in his later writings. For a man who'd built his career on telling stories about his expeditions, the silence was deafening. Fast forward to 1954, 7 years after high jump. Byrd agrees to appear on Longines Chronoscope, a 15-minute interview program that aired on CBS. The show was sponsored by Longines Wittnauer, the Swiss watchmaker, and it featured interviews with politicians, military leaders, scientists, and cultural figures. The format was simple. 2 journalists would sit down with a guest and ask questions. The episodes were recorded and broadcast live or near live. Most were archived. We have recordings of interviews with Harry Truman, Eleanor Roosevelt, and dozens of other public figures from that era. But not Admiral Byrd. According to researchers who've tried to track down the episode, CBS has no record of it. The Paley Center for Media, which holds one of the largest collections of television history in the world, doesn't have it. The Library of Congress doesn't have it. Longines Wittnauer, the sponsor, has no archived copy. There are people alive today who remember watching the interview as children. They remember Byrd talking about Antarctica. They remember him seeming nervous, uncomfortable. But there's no tape, no transcript, no official proof it ever happened beyond scattered memories and a few vague references in TV guides from 1954. So what did Byrd supposedly say on that broadcast? This is where things get speculative, because without the tape, we're relying on second-hand accounts and rumours. But the most persistent claim is that Byrd talked about discovering land beyond the South Pole. Not land on Antarctica, land beyond it. He allegedly described flying over the pole and seeing green valleys, rivers, and what looked like vegetation. Some versions of the story claim he saw animals. Others say he saw structures. Now, before you write this off as pure fantasy, consider the context. In 1947, the same year Byrd returned from high jump, the term flying saucer entered the American lexicon. Kenneth Arnold reported seeing 9 strange craft over Mount Rainier in Washington. The Roswell incident happened in July of that year. The Air Force launched Project Sign to investigate UFO reports. This was the beginning of the modern UFO era, and it coincided almost exactly with Byrd's return from Antarctica and his subsequent silence about what he'd seen. There's also the question of geography. Most people assume Antarctica is just a frozen landmass surrounded by ocean. But if you look at maps from the 16th and 17th centuries, you'll find something strange. Several of them, including the famous Piri Reis map from 1513, show the coastline of Antarctica in remarkable detail. The problem is, Antarctica wasn't officially discovered until 1820, and it wasn't fully mapped until the 20th century using modern technology. How did mapmakers in the 1500s know what the coastline looked like under the ice? The standard explanation is that they copied from earlier maps, possibly from ancient sources. But that raises another question. Who made those ancient maps, and how? Then there's the hollow earth theory. Before you roll your eyes, understand that this wasn't always fringe. In the 19th century, respected scientists, including the astronomer Edmund Halley, proposed that the Earth might be hollow with openings at the poles. The idea was that there could be entire worlds inside the planet, accessible through these polar openings. The theory fell out of favour as we learned more about geology and seismology, but it never completely disappeared. According to hollow Earth proponents, Byrd didn't just fly over Antarctica in 1947, he flew into it. They point to an alleged diary entry from February 1947, where Byrd describes flying over the pole and entering a region where the ice gave way to greenland, mountains and forests. The diary describes encountering a city with crystalline structures and meeting beings who spoke perfect English. These beings allegedly told Byrd that humanity had entered a dangerous age with nuclear weapons, and that they'd been monitoring us closely since the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Is the diary real? Probably not. It didn't surface until decades after Byrd's death in 1957, and there's no way to verify its authenticity. But the fact that it exists and that so many people believe it's real tells you something about the enduring mystery surrounding Byrd and Antarctica. people want to believe there's more to the story. Here's what we know for certain. Operation High Jump happened. It was the largest Antarctic expedition in history. It ended early. Byrd gave an interview to a Chilean newspaper where he talked about polar threats. Then he went silent about the whole thing. In 1954, he appeared on a CBS program that aired once and then vanished. 7 years after that interview, Byrd led one more expedition to Antarctica, called Operation Deep Freeze. He died in 1957, just months after returning. He never wrote a memoir about High Jump. He never gave a detailed account of what happened down there. Now let's talk about why this matters outside of Byrd himself. Antarctica is one of the most restricted places on Earth. The Antarctic Treaty, signed in 1959, prohibits military activity, mineral mining and nuclear testing on the continent. It also requires that all activities be for peaceful purposes and subject to inspection. On the surface, it sounds reasonable. But critics point out that the treaty effectively locks down an entire continent, preventing independent exploration by civilians or non-governmental groups. You can't just buy a boat, sail to Antarctica and start exploring. You need permits, government approval and massive funding. And even then, you're limited to certain areas. There are zones in Antarctica that are completely off limits, even to scientists with proper credentials. Some of these restricted areas are explained away as environmentally sensitive regions. Others are said to house critical research that can't be disturbed. But there's no public database of these zones. The treaty itself was signed by 12 countries initially: Argentina, Australia, Belgium, Chile, France, Japan, New Zealand, Norway, South Africa, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom and the United States. Today, 56 nations are parties to the treaty. That's an incredible level of international cooperation for a frozen wasteland that's supposedly just ice and penguins. Here's where it gets interesting. The treaty includes a clause that freezes all territorial claims. Several countries had claimed sections of Antarctica before 1959. The treaty didn't invalidate those claims, but it suspended them indefinitely. No country can enforce sovereignty. No country can militarize their claimed territory. And no new claims can be made. Why? The official reason is to prevent conflict and ensure Antarctica remains a scientific preserve. But think about the timing. The treaty was signed in 1959, just 12 years after Operation High Jump, and 2 years after Admiral Byrd died. The Cold War was intensifying. The US and Soviet Union were locked in an arms race, and yet on Antarctica they agreed to cooperate. That level of cooperation doesn't happen unless there's a compelling reason. Maybe it was the risk of environmental catastrophe from mining or weapons testing. Or maybe it was something else, something they found, or something Byrd reported that made them realize Antarctica needed to be managed collectively. Then there's the inspection clause. The treaty allows any member country to inspect any other country's facilities in Antarctica at any time. During the Cold War, that meant Soviet inspectors could walk into American bases, and vice versa. That's an extraordinary level of access for a region that's supposedly just about climate research. Consider the Piri-Reis map again. If it really does show Antarctica's coastline before it was covered by ice, that means someone mapped it at least 6,000 years ago, possibly longer. That's before any known advanced civilization, according to mainstream archaeology. The map shows rivers, bays and coastal features that match what we've discovered under the ice using ground-penetrating radar. How is that possible unless someone surveyed Antarctica when it was ice-free? And if they did, that pushes back the timeline of advanced civilization by thousands of years. Or consider the recent discoveries of pyramidal structures beneath the ice, visible in satellite imagery. In 2016, images circulated online showing what appeared to be 3 pyramid-shaped peaks in the Ellsworth Mountains. Geologists say they're natural formations, a result of erosion and glacial movement. But some researchers argue the symmetry is too perfect, the angles too precise, the spacing too deliberate. Natural pyramids exist, sure, but these don't look natural. They look built. Then there's the Neuschwabenland expedition. In 1938, Nazi Germany sent an expedition to Antarctica, specifically to a region they claimed and named Neuschwabenland, or New Swabia. The official story is that they were surveying the area for a potential whaling station. But the Germans dropped metal swastika markers all over the region, took thousands of aerial photographs, and allegedly established a base. After World War II, rumours persisted that high-ranking Nazis had escaped to Antarctica through submarine routes. Were those rumours true? We don't know, but the fact that the Nazis were interested in Antarctica at all raises questions. What did they think was down there? Fast forward to 1947. Operation High Jump happens just 2 years after Germany's defeat. Some researchers believe High Jump wasn't a research mission at all. It was a military operation to root out any remaining Nazi presence in Antarctica. The fleet included an aircraft carrier, the USS Philippine Sea. They brought bombers, fighters, and reconnaissance planes for a scientific expedition. That's serious firepower. Then there's the question of temperature. Antarctica wasn't always frozen. We know from ice core samples that the continent had a temperate climate millions of years ago. But what if that climate persisted longer than we think? Geological evidence suggests Antarctica was ice-free as recently as 6,000 years ago in some regions. That's within the time frame of recorded human civilization. The Sumerians, the Egyptians, the Indus Valley, all of these cultures existed when parts of Antarctica might still have been habitable. If so, who lived there, and what happened to them? There's another detail most people don't know about. In 1929, Admiral Byrd's first Antarctic expedition discovered coal deposits, coal forms from ancient forests, which means at some point Antarctica had forests, trees, an ecosystem. That's consistent with the ice-free Antarctica theory. And then there are the lakes. Beneath the ice sheet, Antarctica has over 400 subglacial lakes. The largest, Lake Vostok, is roughly the size of Lake Ontario. It's been sealed under ice for millions of years. Russian scientists drilled down to it in 2004 and found microbial life. But here's the real question. If there are 400 lakes under the ice, how many have been explored? And what did the researchers find that hasn't been made public? This is where the Tartaria angle comes in. For those unfamiliar, Tartaria refers to a supposed advanced civilization that existed across much of Asia and possibly other continents before being erased from history. Proponents of the Tartaria theory argue that many structures attributed to the 18th and 19th centuries were actually built by this earlier civilization, and that a global Raspet event, possibly a mud flood or a pole shift, buried much of their world. The evidence they point to is compelling, even if mainstream historians won't touch it. Photographs from the 1800s and early 1900s show major cities with buildings half buried in mud and dirt. The official explanation is that these cities were built on landfill or that streets were raised over time. But the Tartaria researchers ask why there are so many photos of basement windows at street level, and why so many old buildings have ornate architecture on what's now the ground floor. Then there are the World's Fairs. Between 1850 and 1915, dozens of World's Fairs were held across the globe. These fairs featured massive, elaborate buildings with domes, columns, and intricate facades. According to official records, they were constructed in just months, then torn down right after the fair ended. Tartaria proponents argue that these buildings weren't temporary at all. They were remnants of the earlier civilization, repurposed for the fairs, then demolished to erase the evidence. Maps are another piece of the puzzle. Throughout the 1700s and into the 1800s, maps of Asia labelled huge territories as Tartary or the Tartarian Empire. Then by the early 1900s, those labels disappear. The land is carved up into new nations, new borders, new names. The official story is that Tartary was just a vague European term for the region, not an actual empire. But if that's true, why was it on maps for over a century? If Tartaria was real, and if it extended to Antarctica, then what Byrd allegedly saw in 1947 makes more sense. Not UFOs or hollow earth beings, but remnants of a lost civilization, ruins, architecture, evidence of advanced construction techniques in a place that's supposed to have been frozen and uninhabited for all of human history. That would be enough to rewrite the textbooks, and that would be a very good reason to suppress what Byrd found. Let's go back to the 1954 interview. Why would CBS, a major television network, erase a recorded episode? Networks don't just lose tapes, they archive everything, especially interviews with famous people. The only explanation that makes sense is that someone wanted the tape gone. But who? The government? The military? Byrd himself? And if it was deliberately erased, that means someone made a decision that the content was too dangerous to remain in public circulation. Now, some skeptics argue that the episode never existed at all, that it's a false memory or a conflation of different Byrd interviews. But there are too many independent sources who remember it. TV listings from 1954 confirm that Byrd was scheduled to appear on Longines' Chronoscope. Multiple people who worked in broadcasting at the time have gone on record saying they saw the interview or heard about it. The most likely explanation is that it happened, it aired, and then it was pulled. Here's another piece of the puzzle. In the years after 1954, Byrd became even more reclusive. He led Operation Deep Freeze in 1955, but his role was largely ceremonial. Younger officers did the real work. Byrd stayed at base camp, did some flying, but didn't push into unknown territory the way he had in earlier expeditions. It was as if he'd been told to stay put, or maybe he'd seen enough. There's a letter that allegedly came to light in the 1990s, written by Byrd to his son in 1956. In it, Byrd supposedly expressed regret about things he couldn't talk about, secrets he was forced to keep. The letter has never been authenticated, but it's cited frequently by researchers who believe Byrd was silenced. Whether it's real or not, it captures a sentiment that many people who study Byrd feel intuitively. This was a man who'd spent his life exploring, documenting, and sharing his discoveries. And then, suddenly, he stopped. Let's zoom out for a second. Why does any of this matter in 2026? Because the questions Byrd's story raises are questions we're still asking. What don't we know about our own planet? How much of our history has been rewritten or hidden? Who decides what's true and what gets buried? These aren't just abstract philosophical questions. They have real implications for how we understand the world and our place in it. Take climate science, for example. We're told Antarctica is a pristine, untouched wilderness, a barometer for understanding climate change. But what if it's not untouched? What if there are bases, tunnels, or research facilities down there that aren't on any public map? The Antarctic Treaty allows for scientific research, and several countries, including the United States, Russia, and China, maintain permanent bases on the continent. But what are they studying, and why is so much of it classified? In recent years, satellite imagery has revealed strange geometric patterns in Antarctica's ice. Researchers have photographed what appear to be massive rectangular structures beneath the surface, visible only because of slight variations in snow coverage. The official explanation is that these are natural formations or old research stations, but some of these structures are miles long, far larger than any known base. If they're natural, why do they have such precise angles? And if they're man-made, when were they built, and by whom? Or take archaeology. Mainstream academia teaches that human civilization began around 10,000 years ago with the agricultural revolution. Anything before that was hunter-gatherers, small tribes, no cities, no monuments, but discoveries like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, which dates back 12,000 years, challenge that timeline. And if the timeline is wrong about that, what else is it wrong about? Could there have been advanced civilizations in Antarctica, South America, or other places that we've written off as uninhabitable during the Ice Age? The point is, Admiral Byrd's story is a doorway into much larger questions, and whether you believe he found a hidden land, ancient ruins, or something else entirely, the fact remains that he saw something. Something significant enough that he talked about it in 1947, then went silent. Something significant enough that a television interview about it disappeared. So what happened to the tape? The most mundane explanation is that it was lost in a fire, a flood, or simple negligence. CBS had a major archive fire in the 1970s that destroyed thousands of recordings. It's possible Byrd's interview was among them. But fires don't explain why there's no transcript, no written record, no mention of the episode in CBS's internal documents. It's as if it was scrubbed, not just lost. Another possibility is that Byrd himself requested the tape be destroyed. Maybe he said something on air that he regretted, something that contradicted his official statements or put him at odds with the military. By 1954, Byrd was 66 and still technically on active duty. If he'd broken protocol or revealed classified information, he could have faced serious consequences. Asking CBS to pull the tape and bury it might have been his way of avoiding a court-martial. Or maybe the tape still exists. Maybe it's sitting in a vault somewhere, classified under national security laws. The US government has a long history of classifying information related to Antarctica. Documents about Operation High Jump weren't fully declassified until the 1990s, and even then portions were redacted. If Byrd's 1954 interview touched on classified topics, military installations, or strategic assets, it could easily have been seized and locked away. The final possibility is the one that keeps conspiracy researchers up at night. What if the interview revealed something so fundamentally destabilizing that it couldn't be allowed to circulate? If Byrd talked about finding evidence of pre-Ice Age civilizations, or encountering technology that shouldn't exist, or seeing geographic features that contradict accepted maps, that's not just a military secret. That's a paradigm shift. Think about it. If people found out that Antarctica contained ruins from a civilization older than anything in our textbooks, what would that do to archaeology, geology, and anthropology as disciplines? The institutions that control knowledge have a vested interest in maintaining the official narrative, not because they're evil, but because stability depends on it. Once you start pulling threads, the whole tapestry unravels. Admiral Byrd died on March 11, 1957. He was 68 years old. The cause of death was listed as heart disease. He's buried in Arlington National Cemetery, a hero's resting place. But the questions he left behind are still unanswered. And as long as that 1954 interview remains missing, people will keep asking, what did he say? What did he see? And who decided the world wasn't ready to know? Here's the thing about suppressed history. It doesn't stay suppressed forever. Secrets leak, documents get declassified, witnesses come forward. The truth has a way of surfacing, even if it takes decades. We're living in an era where more information is accessible than ever before. Satellite imagery, declassified archives, independent researchers, all of it is slowly chipping away at the official story. And the more we learn, the less the accepted narrative makes sense. Antarctica is still there. It's still the most mysterious continent on the planet. And whether or not Admiral Byrd found something extraordinary in 1947, the fact remains that we don't know what's under all that ice. We don't know what's in the restricted zones. We don't know what research is being conducted at those bases. And we don't know why a simple television interview from 1954 had to disappear. The story of Admiral Byrd isn't just about one man. It's about the gap between what we're told and what's true. It's about the things that get erased, the questions that go unanswered, and the people who dare to ask them anyway. So the next time someone tells you that everything worth discovering has already been discovered, or that history is settled, or that there are no more mysteries left, remember Admiral Byrd. Remember the interview that aired once and vanished, and ask yourself, what else are we not being told? That's where I leave it. If this made you think, subscribe. I dig into suppressed history, forbidden archaeology, and the inconvenient truths that don't make it into textbooks every single week. And if you want to go deeper on Antarctica, the Tartaria connection, or what really happened during Operation High Jump, there's another video on screen right now that connects the dots even further. Click it.